So, hello and welcome to 11FS Spotlight. I'm Benjamin Ensor. In this weekly show, we shine a spotlight on the best and the brightest in tech and the financial services industry to try and understand what gets them going, growing, and what they think the future of the industry will look like. On today's Spotlight, I'm delighted to be joined by Cheryl Harrison, Deputy Director, Global Cash-Based Transfers Division at the World Food Programme in Rome. How are you doing today, Cheryl?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me on the show, Benjamin, but I just want to put a caveat right up front. I am definitely not an expert in financial services or fintech. What we're good at WFP is just getting money to people really quickly who are in desperate need.
I'd like to say that all of fintech has the ambition of getting money to people who desperately need it quickly, but that's not quite true. But all of fintech is about trying to get money to the people who need it. And I don't know that you have to be an expert in fintech to help people. So I don't think we said you were an expert in fintech. We said you were an expert in other areas. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about you, Cheryl, and your career, and take a dive into the wonderful work that all the people at the World Food Programme are doing, particularly when it comes to financial empowerment and financial inclusion. So to start off, could you give us a sort of 1 minute explanation of what the WFP is and what it does, and even actually for me, should I call it the WFP or the World Food Programme?
You can call it either. WFP is common, but it's good to repeat World Food Programme because sometimes people don't really know what that acronym means. So in WFP, we work every day to make sure that nobody goes hungry. And we've got about 20,000 staff worldwide, working in about 80 countries. We're part of the United Nations. We're one of the more operational agencies in the United Nations, and we're the world's largest humanitarian agency. So it's an exciting organization to work in. Very fast moving.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role and what you do? You've told us you're not a fintech expert, but what is your role and what do you do?
Okay, well, I have probably the best job in the world. I get to wake up every morning and think about and do stuff to get more money into more women's hands. So that's entirely what my job is about. We give cash to people almost as much as we give food to people in WFP, and it's a super exciting portfolio.
So what led you to where you are today? Where did you start, and how did you get to where you are now?
Where did I start? My goodness. Let's see. Okay, well, I'll just start with my academic home. I started studying gender and development, and then I taught that at a university. I had always thought about joining the UN. So when I found the right opportunity, I did. That was around 2002, starting on just a consultancy in the gender division, and then I've had almost 20 years of a fantastic career since then.
Okay, so your background's really sort of equality and women's rights rather than cash-based programs or things like that.
Quite right.
Yeah. Absolutely. What's your favorite part of the job? I mean, you've already given us a sense of that, but what do you love about what you do?
Okay, well, I get to talk to women all over the world. I get to talk to women who live in like places that very few people from outside go. I remember, for example, when I was in Sudan, I spent a couple of years in Khartoum, and I had visited all of our field offices. We've got a lot of field offices in the Darfurs, in the Red Sea, Port Sudan, all the way over in the Kordofans. And I was talking with the Minister of Finance, and he had asked me, so, have you had a chance to travel around the country at all? So I told him all the different places I had visited, and he said, oh my, I think you've seen more of Sudan than I have. So it's a fantastic job because you're not just passing through, or you're not just living in the capital. You're actually going out to the furthest reaches and talking to women and finding out how they're living and what their challenges are. It's an amazing job.
So let's just one more thing, just to think about what What were your other options? What other careers were you considering before you you said you thought about, working for the UN or other agencies? Were you considering an academic career? What were the other options that you were thinking about when, earlier in your career?
Oh, Benjamin, I would have stayed in school forever. I love studying. I love researching. I guess it in the same way that WFP really feeds my curiosity, academic life really fed my curiosity, because you can take a subject and drill and drill and drill forever on it. And and I enjoy teaching as well.
Okay. So let's take a step back and sort of think about the bigger picture of sort of economic empowerment and financial inclusion, particularly sort of digital financial inclusion, perhaps, and financial inclusion for women. We've discussed on previous episodes of Spotlights, we've had a number of guests associated with financial inclusion, trying to improve the lives of people all around the world, and so on. So we'd love to sort of dig in a bit more into how you're at the World Food Programme. You're trying to make it finance more accessible, particularly for people who've perhaps been left behind, people who are in some of the poorest, most impoverished parts of the world. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're trying to do that and how you're trying to sort of bring people in and help level them up, I suppose, or help them?
Yeah, and it's us leveling up as well. Humanitarians leveling up, as well. I'll just take you back a little bit to 2009. WFP was just starting to use cash. Mostly we had been using in-kind food as humanitarian assistance. We were just starting to dabble in cash, like maybe about $10 million a year. And that's when I first cut my teeth on using cash for humanitarian transfers as well. And since then it's grown astronomically. Now last year I think we did $2.1 billion to 40 million people in cash. And that does, we can get cash. We can get cash to anyone, anywhere, anytime. This is no problem. But it begs the question of what can we leave them with when humanitarian assistance ends, when the crisis ends and WFP pulls out? How are they going to manage their money after that? Can we leave them with a bank account, a mobile money account? Can we leave them as knowledgeable consumers of financial products and services? If that's possible, then that's going to really increase the impact of our humanitarian resources.
That's really, really interesting. So you're really trying to think hard about the long-term effects of sometimes shorter-term programs. Mm-hmm. It's not obvious why the World Food Programme, with food in its title, would be distributing lots of cash rather than food. Why do you do that? Why cash? And do you worry about making sure that cash actually does turn into food? Because conceivably that cash could turn into other things that are maybe not so helpful.
Yeah, so we used to worry about that a lot. I think that was the fundamental question that held WFP back for so long from doing something that is so obvious. Well, we're responding to people who are in crisis, and when you're in crisis and maybe you've fled conflict, your life is in tatters. You need help. Yeah, food's great. Food's really good because everyone needs to eat every day, but people also need to live. They need to get their kids into school. They need to buy medicine. They need to fix up a home. There's so many things that people need. And if all they're getting is in-kind food, then they have to make trade-offs. Sometimes they'll sell a little bit of the food to have cash so that they can do these other things. It's really hard, for example, for a mother to try and decide, okay, should I feed my children or do I make sure she gets to school? Because for that girl, the food on the plate's really important, but the education is as well.
Let's just have one more quick thought about money, and then I'd like to move on to sort of hearing more about women and empowerment for women. But on the money point, how important is it that money is sort of digital versus physical cash? How big a role does sort of mobile money and so on, and digital wallets and so on play in your programs?
Yeah, not as big of a role as I wish they would. I started out in Kenya in 2009. That was the first cash transfer program I ever did. And you know what was happening in Kenya at that time, Benjamin. M-Pesa was about 2 years old, I think, at that point, but it was just taking off. Absolutely. And within a few years, it was omnipresent. You could send money to anybody in the country. They could pay for anything that they needed to, because they had all these wonderful products bundled around it, like Lipa Nam Pesa, and just fantastic things. So that's where I did my learning, and I fell in love with mobile money. Absolutely fell in love with it. I thought it was the slickest, easiest, cheapest. It was so affordable, and people understood how to use it. And anywhere people could use it. Then I moved to Uganda.
Which is a similar country in many respects, right?
Similar in many respects, but they have, how should we say, sleepy regulators as opposed to the regulators in Kenya, who were, really, they had pro-poor right in their mandate. It was very, very clear. In Kenya, they also had an aggressively innovative, financial sector, some amazing CEOs at the time that really drove all that forward. Not so much in Uganda. And I realized that mobile money is just not the same option everywhere. It should be. It's fantastic because of how quickly it can get rid of cash entirely, how quickly you can turn an entire ecosystem cashless. But it's not the case in very many countries in the world, frankly, and especially in the parts of the countries where we're working. Even mobile network operators and mobile money operators don't really consider the people that we're dealing with as real customers.
Why? Because they're poor? Because they're women? Why do they not consider them real customers?
They don't have a lot of money. They're hard to reach. So, it's hard to make sure they've got steady network. It's hard to have agents have enough business in those areas. If there's not enough money flowing through. They don't buy data. They don't buy data, and they use voice very sparingly. And those are really the big money makers. Yeah. So, I don't think Safaricom makes most of its money off of M-Pesa. It makes it off of data, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And
so
voice.
It's hard to make the networks profitable for the network operators. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's come back to the issue of sort of women's economic empowerment and sort of financial inclusion and how that contributes to poverty reduction. I guess a point I'd love to start on is the sort of the role of patriarchy in societies and the impact of funding women rather than men. My daughter will be pleased with me for asking this. How important is that the money is channeled to women and mothers specifically? I know that's not the only thing you do, but how important is that? And why is that important?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a very simple equation why it's important, but it's very complicated to fix. So the simple answer is 70% of the world's poor, that's people who are living below the poverty line, are women. Women are massively overrepresented in informal sectors and take care of most of the unpaid work in the world, as you know. And because of that, their productivity is really lost. They're left out of the formal labor market, and that's a huge potential for every country, untapped potential. So getting women's economic empowerment means basically that you are an economic actor, on the same footing as men. And if societies, if governments bore down on this and put policies in place and got women into the formal sector in a way that they could participate on an equal footing with men, GDP would go up. Yeah. And when GDP goes up, poverty goes down. It's a pretty simple equation. Very complicated to fix, though.
Indeed. There was an interesting article in The Economist, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, about how societies or countries that neglect their women end up just completely neglecting the whole economy and everything. And I realize you probably need to be careful in some of the comments you make, but are there countries that you can point to that have been good examples and that have made progress on sort of economic empowerment for women over the last sort of 10 or 15 years? Are there countries you point to and say, it's getting better there? I realize it's not a long way from fixed, as you said. It's very, very complicated problems, but
Oh gosh, I wouldn't want to actually say the name of certain countries
Okay,
and
okay,
single them out,
okay.
but I do know that there are advances being made. There's no question about that. There was a lot of ground lost, however, with COVID. So you might not be aware, but the World Economic Forum actually calculates how long it's going to take for women to become equal with men if the pace of change continues as it is. And before the pandemic, they had calculated it was going to take another 100 years. So it was going to be another 100 years before women gained the same economic power as men, kind of thing, or equality, with men as economic actors. After COVID, now they're calculating 136. So we lost almost 40 years in 1 year. It's stunning, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really hard. And that's, not our children's generation, not their children's generation. It's not even the generation after that. I mean, it's unimaginably far in the future, isn't it? It's terrible. Do you think this issue gets the attention it deserves? Do you think this is widely understood?
No, it's not. I mean, not even close. If it were, then we would our field teams wouldn't struggle so much to try and get money and digital money to the people that we're serving. These people just aren't on. They're just not on the radar. They're not considered. They don't have a voice. There's about 1.1 billion people, I think, that don't have national IDs even. The majority of those, I think about over 80%, live in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And most of those are women. So if you don't have an ID, you can't get a bank account, you can't get a SIM card in your own name, you can't access government services, and you can't vote. So you don't have a voice really at all. So it almost really starts there, frankly. As far as the financial inclusion journey goes, many women just are blocked right from the outset. Then there's places, of course, in the world where women still can't get a bank account without her husband's signature, or a SIM card without her husband's signature, or she can't even leave the home without a male escort. So there's lots of variety and lots of different contexts, but lots of challenges for women.
I was going to ask you about some of the sort of obstacles for women, but you've already given us a number of them. Needing permission from a husband in certain countries, not having an identity, the network operators not thinking it worthwhile to extend service to customers, and so on. Are there other obstacles in it? I mean, there's already some pretty huge obstacles. Are there others, or are those the bulk of the obstacles?
Oh gosh, there's so many others, and a lot of it also comes back to women, the expectation that women are going to take care of everybody in the family. So all of that unpaid care work that has really, really increased, since the pandemic. There's shocking statistics on the number of women who have had to drop out of work if they were in the formal labor force. Shocking what happened in many countries. The informal sector was just decimated. People couldn't. The tea sellers and the petty traders and all those women who sell food or whatever on the street corners. They were all told they couldn't. They lost their jobs. They lost their businesses, and they were told to go home. So for women, the pandemic has been really devastating. Really devastating.
Yeah. It has. You mentioned when you were talking about identities, which I thought was a really, really interesting point and one that's easily overlooked. You mentioned South Asia, and I was thinking about India, where the government with the Aadhaar program has actually extended identities out to millions more people. Are programs like that helpful? Is that a step in the right direction by India? I mean, obviously, again, this is complicated. There's lots of problems, but is that a step in the right direction?
Absolutely, it is, and if you take a look at some of the kind of principles around good digital IDs, the more that governments are able to do that and ensure that everybody has a digital ID, but that it's a good one. It's one where people have control over their own information and they can easily update it, and where they're basically owning their own identity, then that's extremely helpful. That pushes things forward a lot. It's interesting, Benjamin. I think it was earlier this year. I was on an ID for Africa panel, which was on IDs and women. Really. So it was talking about IDs, Africa, and women, all very close to my heart. And it was a great panel. It was an amazing panel that they had put together, really top-notch speakers and everything. But it was the least attended, or one of the worst attended webinars. They have regular webinars of all. So people are just not interested in this subject.
That's really disappointing. So how can we influence the sort of discourse? What can people, watching this or, listening to some of our podcasts and so on, what role can people working in the fintech industry, what can they do to help? I mean, I suppose part of it is, listen, understand the problem, but are there things that people can do? Obviously, as individuals, we can contribute to your programs, but what can we do as a sort of industry? What can the fintech industry do potentially to help here?
Okay. Well, first of all, I would start off by reading Melinda French Gates' white paper that she wrote, that gave a lot of amazing recommendations to governments on policy, economic policy, social policy, health policy, how to build back better after the pandemic. And there are some aspects to that related to financial inclusion that are really important, and just understanding how that fits into the whole picture of what a country needs to do to be able to make advances on this front. That would be a really good place to start. I think that we need to spend more time going out and talking to women. It's my favorite part of my job, is going out, sitting under a tree, having a cup of tea, and just saying, how's it going? What's going on? Finding out about their lives, listening to a little bit of gossip, and really digging into a lot of the challenges. You can find solutions pretty fast if you just ask the women themselves.
That's a really good tip. I mean, at 11FS, we do a lot of sort of qualitative research where we try and tackle every problem by starting with the customer and understand what their problem is and see it from their perspective. Because, yes, you go in with some assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions, there's something true in them, and often they're quite wrong. And, you learn by, as you say, talking to people.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the WFP and its sort of work with governments? Are you do you sort of work with governments on their sort of social protection systems? I mean, obviously there are governments that are hit, or countries that are hit by calamities. Clearly, if there's some kind of civil war or civil unrest going on, that just creates havoc and can drive famine and so on. But there are other governments that are getting hit maybe by natural disasters, maybe caused by climate change and global warming and so on. How much are you able to sort of work with governments and sort of try and collaborate with them on some of what they're doing?
A lot. In fact, and this really took off during the pandemic, because, as you know, pretty much every government in the world did some form of unrestricted cash transfer to their citizens to help them kind of cope, but also just frankly to keep money flowing through the economy. It was really important to put cash right out where it was going to be spent by a consumer right away, and the economy would keep moving. And a lot of the governments in places where we work turned to us because we were already giving cash to people that are really hard to reach, so people that they have trouble reaching, and we had really good payment systems set up. So they asked us, okay, can you help us to get this money to these people? And that's one thing that we did quite a lot of, and we're still doing quite a lot of, doing the cash transfers for the government using our own payment systems for one reason or another. But more important is at the same time to help them to build and expand their payment system, their social registries, so that they're able ultimately to have a really robust system themselves.
That's super, super interesting that there are actually some governments are using your infrastructure or infrastructure that you've sort of assembled to pay their own citizens or send money to their own citizens. It's an interesting point you make as well about identity, because presumably there are governments that actually just don't know how many people they have in their country. They don't know how many citizens they have. They don't have good lists of who their citizens are and so on. And that must make it incredibly difficult to get help where it's needed at all. I mean, in addition to all the other difficulties.
It is. It's one of the biggest barriers for us to be able to get people accounts of any sort is the fact that most of them don't have IDs. They don't have a national ID. And so it's, we can give them functional IDs, but that only works to identify them as somebody that we are assisting. It doesn't work to actually, register for a SIM card or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not the same level of sort of robustness, is it? Yeah. So sort of last question in this sort of section of our conversation, what are you most proud of? I mean, clearly the World Food Programme does a lot of good for a lot of people. What are you individually sort of proud of, what you or your team have achieved?
Okay, well, it's sort of in my past. I'm proud of a lot of things. I have just an amazing team working with me, but I was really, really proud, about 10 years ago when my team in Kenya started the very first direct helpline for the people that we're serving. So we give assistance to about 100 million people a year. It's pretty complicated to be able to have a channel directly with them, with each one of them, that any one of them can at any time contact you and say, I'm having a problem. So, but we cracked that nut, we figured it out, and it was a real game changer. I mean, the quality of our programs just went way up because it wasn't relying on, me or one of my staff to go out into the field to meet people and talk with them. We heard about everything as it was happening. Any problem that was happening, we heard about it right away. And it just established so much trust. It just made the whole relationship with the people that we're working with so much deeper. And I'm really proud of that one.
And rightly so. That's super, super interesting. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this show. So we want to wrap up by asking you sort of one last question, which you can answer however you like. And it can be related to sort of finance or the World Food Programme or not. What advice would you give your younger self? So if you sort of think back to earlier in your career, what have you learned? What advice would you give yourself now you look back?
Yeah, because when I was younger, I was really set on, having a career in the UN. And I think looking back, what I would tell my younger self is get really fit and put your armor on, because the UN is a really tough place for a woman to work. And it's really, really hard out there for women in the world. So if you're wanting to help yourself as a woman and help the women around you and help women who are living, further away even from you, who are having it really, really tough, you've got to toughen up big time.
Pains me to hear things like that. I have, I had amazing grandmothers. I have an amazing mother. I have, amazing sister, amazing wife, amazing daughter. But it pains me sometimes to be reminded of how difficult it can be in organizations where it shouldn't be difficult to succeed as a woman. It is, and it's wrong and painful to hear it. But
it is, Benjamin, and when I was in high school, I got into a mock UN General Assembly, and I was really excited. I think I had some small country like Upper Volta or something, save our river. So I got to represent Upper Volta in the General Assembly, and I loved it. But there were I think there were about 60 boys and maybe 3 or 4 of us girls. It was very lonely in that, and you felt very, very self-conscious. At that age you feel self-conscious anyways. But
of course.
And then I was really saddened to see, fast forward to just a few years ago, and my son was, I went to his school. They were having a mock General Assembly as well. And there on the stage were 10 boys and 2 girls. So the ratio hadn't really changed very much in 30 years.
That's not right. We need to change that. Well, there's a lot of things we need to change, but we need to bring up the next generation to think differently and better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, just before we finish off, what's next for the World Food Programme? Obviously you've described the immense challenges that the world and your organisation faces, but what are a couple of things that are right at the top of your agenda?
Oh, I definitely. We're going to double down on this, working with governments, because we can reach tens of millions. We can reach 100 million people, but if we're helping governments, then we're going to reach way more people. We can reach 1 billion people if we're working to help governments get their social protection systems in place. So I think that's really big. The next generation, shall we say, of WFP is just being a service provider to governments, helping them get set up and do good payments.
I've got to say, I'm really struggling with the numbers of people you're helping. You're making me feel so small and inadequate because of the amazing work that you and your teams are doing. It's just fantastic hearing about the millions of people that you're helping. So, fantastic work by you and all of your teams. Really, really impressive to hear it. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the show. Unfortunately, I'd happily talk to you all day, but you don't have all day. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit about the work that you and your team do. It's been brilliant. Where can people find out more about you and everything that you and the World Food Programme are getting up to?
Okay, well, we have a website, wfp.org. I have a LinkedIn channel as well, and I'm on Twitter, so you'll find me really easily.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, that's all that we have time for this week. Please make sure you follow 11FS on LinkedIn and Twitter so that you never miss an episode, and go and visit the 11FS YouTube channel where you can catch up on previous episodes. So have a great week, everyone. Thank you so much, Cheryl, and goodbye.
Thanks a million, Benjamin.